During middle school one year, my 7th grade class went on a camping trip together to Sequoia National Park. Since we lived in the city, the park was a pretty far drive away from where we lived, and we were all pretty eager to finally get to explore the real wilderness. After a long 4-hour bus ride, we finally reached the park. Upon reaching our campsite, my best friend Zach and I decided to set our tents further away from everyone else's. We always liked to wander off and explore on our own. We thought it would be pretty cool to sleep deep in the woods, as close to nature as possible. It was getting dark by the time we finished pitching our tents, and someone had started a bonfire, so we all gathered around to chat and try and scare each other with ghost stories. The principal's daughter told us that this campsite had been closed off for a long time due to a murder that had taken place there long ago. According to her, an entire family had been murdered by a psycho killer that lurked around these parts. Another student said that it wasn't a murder. He claimed the campsite was haunted and we were all doomed. Our teacher, Mr. Brown, laughed and told us that these were just scary campfire stories, and none of them were true. After dinner, we settled in our tents. I was tired from the long bus ride there and immediately fell asleep. When I woke up, I found that Zach wasn't in the tent. Thinking that he'd gone to use the bathroom, I went outside to check on him. But the bathrooms were unoccupied, and there was no sign of Zach anywhere outside. I heard some bushes rustling behind me and peered into the dense woods. Zach had always been up for adventure, so I hoped it was just him making those sounds. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to go check it out and went in the direction of the noise. Delving further into the woods, I realized it wasn't Zach making the noise, but some kind of animal that I couldn't quite make out. It had its head inside a bush for some reason, possibly a bear eating berries. Just then, my foot stepped on a tiny branch, causing it to snap. The creature turned to look towards my direction, and I saw that it wasn't a bear. From what I could make out, it was something of a mix between a dog and a human. It let out an ominous growl that slowly made its way towards me. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I yelled and immediately bolted back towards the campsite. The creature followed me. Although it looked like a mix of a wolf and a dog, it was twice the size of any wolf I had ever seen. I somehow made it back to the campsite and bumped into my teacher, Mr. Brown. He reprimanded me for being outside my tent this late, but he saw the terrified look on my face and asked me what was wrong. He became really worried after I told him about Zach's disappearance and the big wolf animal that I'd seen. Looking back now, it was weird that the creature didn't follow me back into the campsite. A search party was formed immediately, and everyone set out to search for Zach. The entire forest soon echoed with calls for Zach. If he was nearby, he should have heard us by then. We searched until dawn, but there was no sign of him. We separated into smaller groups and went searching deeper into the woods. Then, from a distance, I saw something. It looked like an animal. Immediately, I remembered the one from earlier, so I maintained my distance. I looked for members of my group, but in my search, I hadn't realized that I drifted further away from my search group. It was indeed a large dog, but then, to my horror, it stood up on its hind legs. I suddenly felt goosebumps all over my body, and then the animal turned its head towards me and gave out another ominous growl. I bolted in the opposite direction, shouting for help, but then I tripped on a rock and fell. That's when I saw it, a severed hand on the ground. The friendship bracelet on it was unmistakably Zach's. I looked behind me, but there was no sign of the dog. I fell on my back. The horror had rendered me completely frozen. My group urgently made their way towards me and asked what was wrong. I told them it was Zach and pointed at the hand. I was crying silent tears and my body was trembling. The police were called and a thorough investigation of the matter was conducted. I gave my statement, describing the animal in vivid detail as best I could. The rest of the camping trip was called off, and we were sent home immediately. They searched for the animal for several weeks, but never caught sight of it. It was the first time someone close to me had died. I didn't know what that animal was. Sometimes I even questioned what I saw. I was only in middle school back then. Maybe my childhood overactive imagination made the situation creepier than it had been. But the tragedy forced me to seek therapy for a long time. I had just turned 13 that summer, and my brother Jacob and I took a camping trip with our dad. My parents had separated the previous year, and we didn't get to spend much time with him since our mom moved to Seattle and our dad lived in California. Jacob and I were super pumped about the camping trip. My dad had even invited 2 of his best friends to come along with their kids as well. We were very excited that we would have other kids to hang out with. The campsite was at a location right next to a beautiful lake. We pitched our tents right next to the water. It was shallow, so we had planned to go swimming in it later as the weather was pretty warm. As the dads got busy with getting a fire going, we decided to play on our own. I picked up a rock from nearby and challenged the others on how far they could skip it across the water. Being the eldest, naturally, I won. We got bored of the game pretty quickly, and then my brother had a glint in his eye. He suggested that we play hide and seek. My dad had told us to strictly stay in the area where they could see us, and we agreed. It was my turn to seek. I closed my eyes, counted to 20, and began to search for everyone. As I looked behind several trees, my eyes caught something glinting underneath the leaves on the ground. I crouched down and saw that it was an expensive watch. However, it was cracked, and there was blood on it. It was weird finding something like this there, but I figured it must have belonged to one of the campers who came to this place before us. Then I caught sight of someone's shoes behind a tree. Immediately I thought, "Found you," and stealthily headed towards them. But when I got to the tree, there was no one there. However, on the ground next to the tree were a pair of shoes on the ground that I'd seen earlier. This was getting pretty weird. Why would someone take their shoes off here? First the watch and now the shoes. I was really puzzled and half expected to find clothes laying around as well. I continued my seeking and found my brother first as he was hiding in one of the tents. And then I found everyone else rather easily one by one, as they weren't very good at hiding. I told them about the watch and the shoes, and they all got really excited as if it were some big mystery that we were supposed to solve. I told them that we should start another round of hide and seek. My brother started counting, standing with his face towards a tree while everyone ran to hide. I looked around. There weren't many places to hide. Maybe I could climb up one of the trees. Then, as I looked at the water, I got a better idea. I took off my t-shirt and shorts and stood at the edge of the water in just my boxers. As soon as my brother finished counting, I lowered myself into the water. It wasn't very cold. I had planned to hold my breath underwater for as long as I could. I had practiced holding my breath underwater during swim class and was able to hold it for around 3 minutes at this point. Then, when I came up for air, I saw that my brother was searching in one of the tents. So I took another deep breath and lowered myself down below the water again. As I opened my eyes under the water, I saw that there were a lot of water plants down there. Additionally, there were even a few objects that were probably thrown away by the other campers. I saw a bundle of clothes stuck between one of the objects. When I looked closely, I realized it wasn't clothes, but a person. I gasped and had to go up for air. Just then my brother yelled in glee that he found me. It appeared he had already found everyone else, but that was the least of my worries now. I dove back in and looked carefully this time. It was a woman's body. Had she drowned here? Or did someone kill her and dump the body? My imagination was running wild. I was also afraid that the corpse would open its eyes and come after me, so I swam back to shore and quickly put on my clothes. Knowing that I had to tell an adult, I found my dad and told him what I had found. His face took on a grave expression. One of the adults dove into the lake to confirm what I'd seen. When he came up, his face was grim, a silent confirmation. My dad declared this place was too dangerous to stay at if someone had been murdered and dumped in the water without anyone finding out about it. They called the cops, and soon enough, blue and red lights could be seen in the distance. The police searched the lake thoroughly, and to our shock and horror, the body I spotted hadn't been the only one in there. There were 4 other bodies. Each was weighed down by a heavy weight tied to them. I shuddered as I thought about it. We were pretty bummed about the camping trip being cut short. However, my brother and I were excited that the police drove us down to the station so we could make a statement. At least we'd be able to show off to our classmates about that. I told the police about the shoes and the watch I had found. The people who had been discovered dead in the water had been missing for months, each disappearing one after the other. The police opened an investigation, but my father told me they were never able to catch the person who did it. The police were sure it had to do with a serial killer that had made the news several months before, but they couldn't find a motive, and the cases remained unsolved. I still wonder if I or anyone from the camping group could have been next. In light of the objects I had found laying around, this could have been mere hunting grounds for him. We certainly dodged a bullet that day. I'm originally from a small town in rural East Texas. Growing up in a family that loved hunting, I spent plenty of weekends with my dad and brother in those familiar backwoods, hunting game birds, squirrel, deer, you name it. Those were some good days. Even when I got older and moved out, I'd come back to the area with my dog Bruce and take him hunting with me. In fact, I even started an online blog called East Texas Hunting Guy, where I'd post about my hunting trips and share photos of my successful catches. Usually it'd be a deer or something. I was still a bachelor at the time, so I'd take Bruce almost every weekend, and then I'd cook up whatever I had caught for both Bruce and I over an open fire. Most of the time, we'd just camp out in the woods for the night. It was one of those typical weekends a couple years ago. I had just caught a deer and set up a fire to cook it up when I heard my dog Bruce start barking off in the distance. It was odd because I hadn't seen any other campers around the area, so I figured he must have spotted another deer or a rabbit. When I went over to where he was, I saw that he was barking at nothing. He kept staring at a specific spot and continued barking at the air. I tried to calm him down, but he was still barking madly. Strange, I thought, since he never gets spooked that easily. I somehow got him back to the campsite, but he kept whining and wouldn't stop. He looked frightened. I'd never seen Bruce scared like this, even when he was just a little pup. I left my dog in the tent and went to check the deer meat that I had set to cook over my campfire. It was almost ready and looked delicious. As usual, I took a selfie with my successful hunt and posted it to the blog. Later, I took another one of my cooked food and posted that as well. All the while, I hadn't heard a single whine from Bruce. Ordinarily, he'd be jumping around once the food was done, trying to get a bite before I had the chance to post it online. I grabbed some ribs and went over to my tent where I had left Bruce. However, he was nowhere to be seen. I whistled. I yelled out his name. My voice was loud enough to have it echo to the end of the woods, but Bruce didn't appear. That was when I began to worry. I went out to look for him even though it was almost sundown. While I was searching, I happened upon a pile of bones. Being an outdoorsman, I immediately recognized that these bones weren't just left by another hunter. They certainly weren't deer or rabbit bones, but something worse. I saw something that resembled a human leg bone, and that's when I suddenly felt a creepy sensation like I was being watched. But there was no one nearby, and still no sign of Bruce. I turned around and went back to my tent to see if Bruce had returned back to the site, but he was nowhere to be found. Exhausted, I decided to get some rest and continue the search for my dog in the morning. I woke up a few hours later, right before sunrise. When Bruce still hadn't returned, I decided to pack up my gear and grab my car keys to go search for him by car. I had parked my truck quite a distance away so as to not scare away the prey, but now I was regretting it. I made my way back to the truck as quickly as I could, but I was completely out of breath. I kept yelling out my dog's name, hoping he'd just come running back. I started the engine and drove around on the unpaved back service roads for a while, yelling out for Bruce, but still nothing. I made it onto the road that exited the backwoods, onto the main highway, just about ready to give up my search when I got that sinister feeling again. And then it happened. Something hit the front of my car and flew over the hood. I got out to see what it was and felt the blood drain from my face. It was an animal head, but not just any animal. My dog's. My worst nightmare had become a reality. It dawned on me that whoever or whatever was out there had gotten to Bruce. Someone had specially thrown it in front of my car for me to see it. And that pile of bones must have been left by someone or something intelligent enough to store them in one place. I called the sheriff to tell him what happened. They investigated the hunting site, but never found any conclusive evidence of what killed my dog. I've gotten older and have a family and more responsibilities now, so I don't go hunting or camping in the wilderness as much as I used to. I shut down my hunting blog soon after that happened. Even now, I get overwhelmed with grief and fear every time I think about my old dog Bruce and the evil thing that killed him that horrible weekend. In fact, I vowed to never return back to those woods in East Texas.